thank you for tuning in to another episode of I'll Allow It Nevada, your go-to podcast for insightful glimpses into the Nevada judiciary. I'm your host, Seth Easley, representing the Supreme Court of Nevada Administrative Office of the Courts. In our last episode, we started a conversation about the 8th Judicial District Court's Gambling Treatment and Diversion program. So let's jump back in with our guests, Presiding Judge Maria Gall and Specialty Court Program Coordinator Josephine Bonomo. I'm curious, so what happens in the case a participant relapses during the program?
So if they relapse, so I have not known of a participant who relapses to problem gambling.
Okay.
And, Josephine can tell me if she's aware of anyone, but it's a very difficult thing to track. Now, we have the participants through their cell phone. Their cell phones are tracked. Their locations are tracked. But you can game online these days.
True.
And while we also track their finances to see if there's, charges being made on the credit card or large cash withdrawals, you can borrow money from a friend, or there are ways you can, you could go to the store and you could buy something and go to the store and convince them to give you a cash refund, right? They're supposed to give it to you on the credit card, but you could convince them to give it to you in cash. You could start selling off things in your home and we would never know about it. So I've actually never known of anyone who's relapsed, and perhaps that's true. Like there hasn't been anyone, and we've been doing this really wonderful job. I would be very surprised, given the statistics, that in fact, we've never had anyone relapse into problem gambling. I think it's more statistically likely that we've had people relapse and we just don't know about it. But in theory, if we knew about it, it's not an automatic exclusion from the court, and not at all. The expectation is that because they have a problem, they might relapse, and we would just deal with it on the clinical side on a case-by-case basis. But Josephine, are you aware of anyone that's relapsed with gambling?
I have not, but I agree with you that there's a high likelihood that there has been relapses. And I think the good news is that we have seen many participants use their relapse prevention plan and looking at their triggers as ways of talking through potential relapses, at least. And when they go to their therapist and talk about, hey, I was at Albertsons and I saw, a machine and I really had the urge to gamble, the clinician then assesses that situation, talks it through, and they may increase treatment a little bit. So instead of just doing one group a week, maybe it increases to 2 groups a week. So a lot of what we depend on in gambling court is honesty from our clients, from our participants, because it is hard to track. It's very unlike specialty course in like a adult drug court where we do UAs and we can see scientific proof that they might have relapsed. So we depend on their honesty. We depend on them being having trust in their therapist to tell them the truth, or at least talk about how there's potential challenges happening. Our therapists are great at looking and identifying challenges that are coming their way or stressors, and then adjusting treatment in an effort to prevent relapse. So we're hoping that is helping as well long term.
I was curious about that since you both brought it up about tracking that kind of behavior. So acknowledging that it is difficult to track. So Josephine, what does progress look like, even if it's not linear?
So progress in treatment is a very unique thing, and there's been a lot of research on what it should be like and how what factors go into place if things going kind of off path and how to fix it. So it's not linear. We expect it not to be linear, but there's some foundational goals along the way that we look for as milestones. So at the beginning in particular, our focus is on building a therapeutic relationship. This is sometimes hard because our participants are coming in court-ordered and not typically really happy about having to do such intensive programs. They may be grateful that they're not getting a harsher sentence, but it's still not easy, especially at the beginning when we're asking them to take 16 hours a week to do treatment. So building a therapeutic relationship, instilling hope that therapy will actually work. Some people, whether it be a cultural bias or just a family belief, don't believe in therapy. So even introducing some people into therapy if they've never been in therapy before is really important at the beginning. So we look for clients to open up to the clinician, believe that treatment will help, and get engaged. While this happens over time, and it's not unusual for people to take some time in trusting a therapist, we expect it early on. It should be something that happens relatively early on. But we also expect it to wane, so wax and wane. So when a clinician challenges their client, and that should be happening because clinicians aren't clients' friends, we should be challenging their beliefs. Some participants aren't fond of that, so that we may get some pushback or some beliefs that maybe the clinician is not seeing things right. So hopefully the clinician hangs in there, continues to push a little bit to engage them in different ways to think. So when we get to that part where we're kind of dismantling their ways of thinking that haven't served them well, we're hoping they're open enough to try new ways of doing things that they haven't done before. So we get to the point where we call it just a behavioral change and focusing on the actual behaviors. But also, like Judge Gall spoke about early on, kind of the underlying emotional issues that come with a problem gambling issue, so that gambling can change. There's a lot of sometimes what we call treatment resistance about this, because a lot of people believe that they're going to treatment to focus on the gambling, and talking about their family issues or anxiety has nothing to do with it. And why is my therapist talking about my family issues? So there's sometimes some pushback from participants who don't want to go there. The clinicians will encourage them and engage them to do so, because there's oftentimes, most of the time, there's some underlying issues that promote that gambling type of thinking. So we kind of tweak strategies. We move things to make and encourage more attempts at trying new skills. We expect participants sometimes just not to like doing different things. We actually have a GPS system. So we have a way to track on the client's phones where they go, and they're not permitted to go into casinos unless court ordered to do so. So we have them avoid casinos altogether, which is a big change for them. Towards the end of treatment, they may be tested in different ways. And again, not very linear at times, but if they're tested and they start to feel tempted again, we want them to work that out in therapy. So it's not very linear at times, and it shouldn't be. Relapses we do not see as a failure in treatment, just more of an opportunity for things to get tweaked a little bit and to work on a relapse prevention plan.
So now that we've kind of talked about what the program looks like, Judge Gall, can you kind of touch on what outcomes you have seen from this program, whether that's in terms of reduced recidivism, personal transformation, or anything else you've observed?
So I think overall, we've seen very positive outcomes from the program. Overall, with the exception of one case, which I'll kind of generally talk about in a moment, we've had a near 100% reduced recidivism rate. I am not aware of any participant, other than one I'm going to talk about, who has returned to committing crimes, at least any crimes that we know of. None have been reported to us. And in terms of personal transformation, with the caveat that, a number of our participants are, from a family perspective and a career perspective, they come to us sort of set up for success, absent the issue of problem gambling. But we have a number of participants who aren't set up for success in that way. And when you look at the participants who are set up for success, I would say, they're great stories. I'm really happy that they went through the program and they got the benefit of the program and they're on their way back. The way I would put it is they're on their way back to being productive members of society. But when you look at the participants who come to us, who were not set up for success at the beginning, either family-wise or career-wise, and they go through our program, that's where you see the most significant personal transformations. And it's not that they're back on their way to being a productive member of society. It's that they're now put on the road to being a productive member of society. The one caveat I'll say is this case is ongoing, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but we had a participant who frankly should not have been accepted into the program because this participant had other significant substance use disorders. And I feel like we did this participant a real disservice by accepting them into the program. I look back and I feel like, it may have been a harsh result at the beginning to reject them at the program, but I'm often concerned that because we put them in the program, they weren't set up for success within the program because of this other disorder, that they relapsed in their substance use disorder. And during their time out, because they absconded from the program, they picked up new charges. And it seems to me that a lot of the new charges are likely precipitated by the substance use disorder. And so that's the one caveat. And it's one of the reasons moving forward, I think the court, myself as the judge, I think Josephine as the court coordinator and the other stakeholders in our program are scrutinizing people who get referred to us a lot closer to make sure that we're not rejecting really what the most kind thing to do at the beginning is.
That's an important lesson, I guess, but I imagine it's hard at the beginning because you want to help people and maybe looking back, you have some additional clarity, but at the time it just feels like the right thing to do.
Yeah, I try not to be too hard on myself or others, but it is a learning experience for all of us.
So, Josephine, can you kind of share a success story, perhaps, or a type of transformation that really illustrates the impact of this program?
For sure. And this is the part I love to talk about the most because it gives me such satisfaction in seeing that transformation. So we had a participant who started the program with intense feelings of shame. She had a hard time even looking at us in the eye when she spoke because of that shame and guilt about what she did when she was gambling and the crime that occurred because of it. She had very, very little confidence in herself. She found it hard to even just ask questions. So she was extremely silent. Slowly over time with support, encouragement, she was taught skills. We pushed her and just gave her tons of praise. She finally found her voice. So she's at this point now where she came out of her shell. She asks questions. She prompts discussions. And she advocates for herself. And watching that change to the whole team, we witnessed it and just feel like she's a totally different person. So not only did she get treatment for what she came for, the gambling treatment, she also, the byproduct of that was that she became very confident in herself, which is probably part of the reason why she started gambling. So that built her confidence. During the time in the program, she has a lot of difficult life stressors, some job losses, some family issues, some children issues. All of those issues and stressors could have easily caused her to fall back into her old patterns and relapse. But she didn't, and she faced those challenges head on. She asked for additional support. She continued to go to meetings, more meetings than she needed to. And she used the resources that were offered to her, even in job seeking. So not just doing the routine types of things, she broke out of her shell and did different types of things to find a job for herself, to be successful, not just in the program, but I know it was really important for her to show her kids that she could make it. So it's really neat because it kind of has this a bigger effect, right? So it's bigger than just the positive for her, but it also is an example of her showing her children, which included a little girl, that she can make it and that she can pull herself up and do it even when it's hard. And her family and friends are now inviting her back to the fold in parties and celebrations. And they've noticed the changes she's reported, and she feels okay to celebrate and not beat herself up so bad that she was in a shell. So that was an amazing story, and it's one that I know in my career I won't forget that.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this episode of I'll Allow It Nevada. We're always striving to bring you valuable insights and education, not just for judicial officers, but for anyone interested in the Nevada judiciary. If you find our content helpful or intriguing, please share your experience with your friends, family, and colleagues. Your support helps us reach a broader audience and ensures that more people can benefit from our discussions. Thank you for listening and supporting I'll Allow It Nevada. So, in talking about specialty courts, this idea of the ripple effect comes up. How when you treat someone's underlying issue of criminal behavior, it's not just, yes, it's great for that person, but it's great for the entire community. So maybe just expand on that a little bit. How does this court benefit the broader community, not just the participants?
So I think that when you treat and you're able to cure, and I'm using cure very loosely because someone with a gambling disorder or a substance use disorder, they're not cured. They're always living with that disease, and they're always working on that disease for the rest of their life. But to the extent we rehabilitate them through the program, they're doing exactly what I mentioned earlier. They're becoming a productive member of society. They're holding down a full-time job. They're getting back to their community. They're making restitution to the victim. And I get that just because it's a financial crime, I don't think of the crime lightly. I don't think of the crime as any lesser than a violent crime. It's a different type of crime. And we on the bench of the criminal justice system are asking ourselves, what's the best balance here? Is the best balance sending someone away at a cost of, I don't know what it is up to these days. I know maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was $24,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. So do we send someone away at $24,000 a year? Could be more, adjusted for inflation today.
Right.
Or do we rehabilitate them and do we put them back into society where they hold down a full-time job, where they take care of their families, and where they at least make the victim financially whole, understanding that victims, just because they're financially whole, doesn't mean that they're emotionally whole as a result of that.
Josephine, before we wrap up the episode, I wanted to ask you, are there any misconceptions about gambling addiction that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, there's a couple. I'll touch on just two, I think, that are the ones that stick out in my mind. One misconception is that gambling is not really an addiction, that it's still fun, that it's easy to stop. You just don't go to casinos, you don't gamble. But there's a lot of robust research on our brains now that is made very clear that the parts of our brains that are activated for feeling rewarded or having poor impulse control are the exact same for gambling as it is for substance use. So that robust research is really what's driven us to kind of target gambling just as strongly as we're targeting substance use. So it really is an addiction. Another misconception is that it's not a very serious issue, right? There's a belief that it doesn't happen much, or like I said earlier, it's easier to control. We have found in research at this point in time, it tells us that gambling disorder is actually a disorder that has the highest suicide rate of any addiction, which is very scary. There is an extremely high level of shame and stress involved in problem gambling, putting problem gamblers at higher risk for suicide. A lot of it has to do with the financial debt. When people with problem gambling have to borrow money from family or friends, and the guilt and shame that comes about that. Or, like we have in our courts, resort to illegal activities because they're so desperate to gamble, to steal things, to sell things, to find ways to get money to gamble. So it is an addiction, and it is extremely serious due to the suicide potential.
Judge Gall, you kind of touched on this relationship, and this is kind of expanding on what you were just talking about. So Nevada has a unique relationship with gambling. So how visible is problem gambling within Nevada's justice system, or maybe the justice system as a whole?
I don't think it's very visible at all.
Okay.
I think that problem gambling is often overlooked, even if it makes it into what we call the pre-sentence report. I think a lot of times it's not raised by the advocates within the system as an issue that could be treated through a diversion program. So I think it's visible. I just don't think its visibility is as high as mental health issues or substance use disorders. And I would love to be able to change that. But as Josephine mentioned earlier, it's a diagnosis that's newer than other addictions. And I think it's going to take time, basically, to one, get the word out, and two, get all the persons involved in the system on board with the idea that it's a real addiction, and it's an addiction that should be treated like any other addiction.
So for judicial officers or court staff who may encounter someone struggling with problem gambling, what should they be looking for, and how can they respond effectively?
That's an excellent question. And I think what they should be looking for is what they're looking for when they ask about substance use. So treat it just as you would and when you're asking about substance use. So I encourage judicial officers or court staff to ask, do you gamble? How much do you gamble? How often do you gamble? Do you lie about your gambling, or do you have financial issues related to gambling? If there's anything that kind of triggers a question, don't be afraid to talk about it with your defendant, with your client, with your probationer. Send out that person for treatment. There is free treatment in the community. There's treatment that is paid for by insurances. And there are support groups all over town. So asking those questions is very, very important. If they're applying for specialty court, no matter which specialty court an attorney is applying a participant, their defendant for, there is questions that we ask on our application around gambling, which is great because not only do we who get the applications can use to assess, but it also might trigger the attorney to look at it as a potential issue that might be addressed through treatment via gambling court. So responding effectively kind of just depends on the officers or the court staff's role. If it's an officer, they can refer for a treatment, for treatment and assessment. If it's an attorney and they ask those questions, especially because it should be triggered because they have our specialty court applications. It might be something they want to look into, see if they fit the NRS criteria for our program. And our application process for the program is on our website for attorneys to review as well. So questions. There's some really easy screening tools online as well, and that might prompt a conversation if nothing else.
So my next question this one is for you, Judge Gall. So for any other jurisdictions considering a similar program, it's no secret that online gaming is spreading across the U.S. with sports betting, and people can bet on basically anything these days. What advice would you give to jurisdictions considering a similar program, and what lessons have you learned?
So I think the number one thing that I would say to these other jurisdictions who are considering a similar program and who are at the stage where they haven't enacted the enacting statute yet is don't time cap the restitution portion. because in order to really, my view is that in order to really ensure accountability, especially where there's a large amount of restitution that needs to be paid back, even if the clinical elements of rehabilitation have been finished, the court should have the option of keeping the defendant under its supervision for purposes of repayment of restitution. And I would recommend that those states consider not putting a time stamp on or an expiration date, such as we have of 3 years, on their statute, and that they consider at least leaving the time stamp for the restitution portion at the discretion of the court.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very practical insight. So last, but certainly not least, for both of you, if there's one thing you would like listeners to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
For me, it's that I think, and piggybacking off of what Josephine has said, that people should take away that when someone is deep in their addiction and gambling, regardless of the amount of money that they're gambling away, it's not registering with that person what's really happening. Because it is an addiction, like any other addiction, such as substance use disorder. And that person will come to us in gambling treatment diversion court, and they may make full restitution, and they may go through the clinical side, but they're going to be in a lifetime of recovery. And giving that person the tools and the stability that they need not to relapse, and to take accountability is really what, at the end of the day, benefits, but not only that person, but benefits the wider community.
Josephine, do you have anything you would like to add?
Just to reiterate that problem gambling is a very real and serious issue, and problem gamblers, like other people with mental health disorders or substance use disorders, need just as much support and treatment like any other mental health issue. Problem gambling is very unique in that it's still evolving. And unfortunately, it's evolving to a point where we're seeing younger and younger people starting to gamble. We are talking 10, 11 years old, getting on the cell phone and paying games. Even that is considered gambling. You're paying games to have more lives, quote unquote, to play further. That's a level of gambling. Anytime you're giving money at risk of losing that money, that is considered gambling. With the whole movement towards online betting, especially sports betting, problem gambling is at an influx of trying to determine what's morally right, knowing that what's being provided to people in the community is extremely addictive and has been developed to be so, and understandably so for business. But it also causes a great and high level of risk for gambling disorders to occur.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. This was a very interesting discussion. I'm happy to feature this on the show so more people can learn about the treatment court, the important work you're doing, and the issue of problem gambling. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
A heartfelt appreciation to our guest and to everyone who has tuned into this podcast. Before we wrap up, here are a couple of quick important reminders. For continuing legal education credit, be sure to complete a certificate of attendance and email it to jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or comments, we welcome your input. You can email us at jepodcast@nvcourts.nv.gov or submit your topic ideas to the topic suggestion form linked in the episode description. We value and look forward to hearing from our listeners. Stay tuned for more episodes of I'll Allow It Nevada. This is Seth Easley signing off. Take care, Nevada.